Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Caroline Schinkel, founder and director of Camp USA. Today is an extraordinary day in the 4-year history of Camp USA. We are truly honored to welcome such an illustrious, esteemed public servant, a man who served his country as a member of its military, a man who served this great Commonwealth as its governor, a man who serves his country as a highly respected academic. For those reasons, we are fortunate that Governor Michael Dukakis is with us this morning. Mrs. Dukakis, Camp USA is equally delighted to welcome you. Katie Curran, whose grandfather, Jerry Kerr, served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives under the governor's leadership, made today's special program possible. Since Camp USA began, every member of the Curran family has made a significant impact on the program. Katie, Jerry, Caroline, Mr. and Mrs. Curran, Dave and Mary, thank you for every effort on behalf of Camp USA. I founded Camp USA in 2010 to give a voice to the rising generation of student leaders. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan, free, grassroots program to inspire the rising generation, to offer an inclusive, upbeat program where young people, such as this summer's outstanding participants, could learn about the political process in an upbeat, non-judgmental, impartial environment where all opinions are respected. You see, at Camp USA, we debate the issues, we dissect the problems, and we determine solutions. We seek and strive for common ground. I am convinced that the great political divide can be conquered, and that it will be graduates of Camp USA who pave that path and who follow in the footsteps of our illustrious guest speaker and take on the mantle of leadership of this great country. Governor Michael Dukakis is respected on both sides of the political aisle. He is truly a legendary political figure, certainly in Massachusetts, but also on the national and international political stages. Long before he was the 1988 Democratic nominee for President of the United States, he was a fighter and a leader in Massachusetts. His political career began on a local level as an elected town meeting member in Brookline. He went on to serve 4 terms in the Massachusetts House of Representatives before becoming the longest-serving governor in the history of the Commonwealth. His relentless work on behalf of his constituents was recognized by the National Governors Association when they honored him as the most effective governor in 1986. A strong proponent of grassroots campaigning, the governor is a graduate of Swarthmore and Harvard Law. A distinguished author, among his books is How to Get into Politics and Why. Currently making his mark in academia, the governor teaches at the Political Science Department at Northeastern University. The university named its Center for Urban and Regional Policy after the governor and Mrs. Dukakis. Now, please stand and join me in a warm Camp USA welcome for Governor Michael Dukakis.
recognize that song? That's my song. I was nominated in Atlanta. That was the song that we played. And we played it from that point on all during the campaign. Now, I think I'm supposed to have a microphone someplace for the TV. Yes? This one? Great. Okay. It's great to be here. Special thanks to Katie Kern. Where are you, Katie? Who actually invited me. And Caroline, thanks to you for following that up and asking me to come. This is very easy for Kitty and me because our dear, her sister, brother-in-law, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, Al and Ginny Peters, who are with us, live on Wings Neck, just down the street. So we're very familiar with this neighborhood, very familiar with this building, although I think, Katie, this is the first time I've been inside the building. And all of you know what this was before it was a community center, right? What was it? What was this building? This was a railroad station. Did you know that? First time you've heard that? Because the train used to come right down here. And I'm a big train guy, folks. I'm a big train guy. Kitty and I were on the inaugural run of the new, revived Cape train. And it's terrific. And about 11,000 people have already been on that train this summer, and it's been a huge success. And my hope is that we're going to have at least regular service to Buzzards Bay before long, on a regular 7-day-a-week basis. Wouldn't that be nice? And then maybe we can fix up the track to Hyannis and make it go even faster. So I'm a big fan of trains. Now, what am I doing with these spectacles on? Because the adults here have never seen me in glasses. Well, Kitty and I, on the 20th of June, celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. And as she often says, it's never been dull, and it hasn't been. And so we planned this terrific 50th wedding anniversary celebration in which we decided to take our 3 children and their spouses and our 8 grandkids to Greece, first to Athens for a few days, and then to the island of Crete, which is one of the great islands in the Mediterranean, to celebrate our 50th, all of us together. Now, I've worn contact lenses for about 45 years without any problem, and was wearing my contact lenses on the plane going to Greece. And about 2 hours into our trip, we were going to Amsterdam and we were going to change to Athens. I started getting this burning sensation in my left eye. After a couple of hours, I finally decided I'd take the contact lens out. I didn't know what the problem was, but there we were. And I'm very careful with my contact lenses. I take them out every night. I clean them and all this kind of stuff. If you can believe this, 2.5 days later, folks, I almost lost my left eye. There was this very lethal germ, which I guess I picked up on the plane, that somehow contaminated my contact lens. And if it hadn't been for a terrific team of Greek doctors and nurses in Athens, I would have lost that eye. Another 6 or 8 hours and the eye would have been gone. This germ just kind of melts corneas, just goes right through them. And in fact, when I got to the hospital, the doctor who first examined me thought that the eye was gone. But fortunately, the care they gave me was terrific. I was in the hospital for 6 days. I've never been, I'm going to be 80 in November. I've never been in a hospital overnight in my life until this past few weeks. In the hospital for 6 days because Kitty was with me. Our kids, grandkids, all on the island of Crete waiting for us. We never made it. We never made it. But fortunately, my sight is beginning to come back, and it looks as if in the next maybe 3 or 4 weeks I'll have something close to normal vision in my left eye. But I'm not going to be wearing contact lenses. Not going to be wearing contact lenses again. So the people of the Commonwealth, for better or for worse, as well as my students at Northeastern, are going to have to put up with me in spectacles for a while, at least until I get rid of some cataracts or something, get some new lenses. But I'll tell you, it was a strange way to celebrate a 50th wedding anniversary, and I don't recommend it. And if it hadn't been for the owner of the restaurant in Delphi, who knew one of the top eye specialists in Greece and got a hold of him, I'd probably be walking around with blind in one eye. So just be careful. These things, particularly in airplanes, can fly around and do terrible things. Anyway, I'm not sure what you guys want to talk about. Obviously, one of the great things about this camp, Caroline, is that we're getting kids interested in politics, and I think that's terrific. So I thought what I'd do just very briefly is just tell you a little bit about my story. I mean, how did I get into politics? In fact, one of the reasons that former Senator Paul Simon of Illinois, who was also a candidate for the presidency in 1988, we got to know each other and like each other. That's why we wrote the book. One of the reasons we wrote the book was to see if we could introduce young people to real politics, and we asked a bunch of well-known people in public life to tell their story so that you will have a chance to read their stories, because we all have a different story. Now, I grew up in the town of Brookline, which is where? Just outside of Boston. Kitty was actually 3 years behind me in high school, but I wasn't interested in freshman women in those days. She claims that she handed me a cup of water on Beacon Street in Brookline when I ran the Boston Marathon at the age of 17 in 1951. Those were the days, folks. We had a record field of 300. What is it today? About 30,000 people. And there was no shoe made to run on hard surfaces. I ran 26 miles, 385 yards in low-ked sneakers. I'm not kidding you. And finished in 3.5 hours. Not bad at the time. And I was a cross-country runner. Anyway, Katie claims that she says she handed me a cup of water, which is entirely possible because I was dying of thirst as I was around the 24th mile on Beacon Street in Brookline, not too far from where Kitty and Ginny grew up on Beaconsfield Road. But it took me several years to find her, even though she was 3 years behind me. But we grew up in Brookline, and Brookline happens to have a town form of government, as Bourne does it not? With a representative town meeting? You have a representative town meeting? I think so. So, I went to college. Those days, there was a military draft. I was drafted. I spent 16 months in Korea, came back, started at law school, was living at home, and I decided to run for town meeting member. Spent about $10 printing up some cards with my picture and a little background on it. Went out and rang every single doorbell in my precinct. Precinct is the basic unit of politics where the polling place is, about 3,000, Brookline, around 3,000 voters in the precinct. Went out and rang every single doorbell in the precinct, stood in front of the polling place for 13 hours, got elected. Became a member of the town meeting. And that was my beginning. Didn't cost any money, I just went out and knocked on people's doors, introduced myself, and I guess they thought well enough of me that they voted for me. And that started my political career. Then I became actively involved in Democratic politics in the town of Brookline, and then subsequently, when there was a vacancy in the legislature, ran for the legislature, took 6 months off from my law firm, went out and rang every single doorbell in my district for 6 months. But I also had 12 precinct captains, volunteers, people willing to support me, who then recruited 15 or 20 volunteers in each of the precincts who went out and followed up on the work that I was doing. So when Carolyn said, I'm a big fan and believer in grassroots politics, you can understand why. And that's the way I got elected to the governorship. With thousands of people, including people in this community, out knocking on doors for me. One of them was a wonderful guy named Jerry Cahere, who happens to be Katie's grandfather. One of the finest people I have ever known in public life, folks. Sacrificed a committee chairmanship to support me for governor in 1982. And I've never forgotten it. Gutsy, all kinds of integrity, and he and I shared a very strong commitment to better public transportation for the people of this state. But he gave up the chairmanship of the Transportation Committee to support me. The Speaker was not supporting me at that time. He got angry at Jerry. Jerry didn't care. He was willing to support me even though it meant that he sacrificed the committee chairmanship. And one of the things that I told him during that campaign was that if I got elected, I'll never forget it, we had a big fundraiser at a restaurant in Falmouth. It was run by a Greek guy at the time. And it was a hot, hot Saturday afternoon. And I was 2 hours late because there was a huge tie-up in those days. There was no Route 25. There was a huge tie-up on the old road. And we were delayed for 2 hours. Never forget it. And your grandfather was there at the time with all these people waiting for me in the hot sun. I mean, just baking. And when I got there, I said, Jerry, I want to tell you something. If with your help I win this campaign, we're going to build Route 25. And we did. Sadly, he had passed away. And your grandmother was in that lead open car as we kind of headed down the highway and cut the ribbon and inaugurated Route 25, which has made a huge difference, as all of you know, in our ability to get down here. So I'll never forget him. I mean, he was a terrific model of a great public servant and a wonderful friend and a wonderful colleague. Anyway, so what's the point of this story? Well, if I could do it, you can do it, folks. My parents were both immigrants, came over from Greece as young people, did very well. They were remarkable people themselves. But I was asking Katie how come she first got interested in politics. Now, she's kind of been born into it in a way. But you did it the way I did it. In fact, the first elective office I've ever held was as president of the 3rd grade class in Mrs. Ripley's homeroom at the Baker School in Brookline, Massachusetts. And don't ask me why I ran. Don't ask me why my classmates elected me, but I was the president of the 3rd grade class. And years later, I discovered that Mrs. Ripley was still teaching in Groton, Massachusetts. And I'd been elected governor. I called her up and I said, how would you like to bring your class down to meet the guy that you got started in politics? Because she really did. But there were lots of other influences along the way. My basketball coach at Brookline High School, who happened to be Kitty's homeroom teacher, was a wonderful guy named Johnny Grinnell. He was the first adult who ever said to me, Michael, you should seriously think of running for elective office. I was a senior in high school at the time. And when I was nominated for the presidency of the United States in Atlanta, John Grinnell was sitting next to my mother in our family box in Atlanta. Thanks to former students of his who said, we want to send you to the convention so you can watch Kitty and Mike at that convention. Very, very special. Very special. He became the director of guidance at Brookline High School, retired, came down to the Cape, was very actively involved in senior activities in the Cape, and a wonderful, wonderful guy. So, folks, you don't do this on your own. You do it because lots and lots of people make a huge influence on you. Now, why get into politics? Because if you care deeply about your community and state and country and see things that you think can be made better, it's the best way I know to do that. And I can tell you that I can't imagine another life which has been more personally fulfilling and satisfying than the one that Kitty and I have had. She, too, has been deeply and actively involved, always has been. And I'd like to think the Commonwealth is a better place because of the work that we and so many people, including your grandfather, did. And I think it is. But to be deeply and actively involved in your community with your fellow citizens is a very special privilege, folks. Lots of people in the world don't have it, you know. Some of them are fighting and dying to get it. We have it. And it's something that we should take very, very seriously. Still actively involved, love teaching. I don't know how many of you know about Northeastern. I hope some of you at least will be thinking seriously about it. Northeastern is a so-called co-op university. Any of you know what that means? Any of you have any idea what the co-op program? Well, our kids go 5 years, not 4. Typically, most people go 4 years to college. Northeastern students go 5 years. The first year is all academic. Beginning in the second year, they rotate. 6 months work, 6 months study. 6 months work, 6 months study. We call these 6-month periods co-ops. They are paid jobs developed by the university related to our students' majors. So while it takes 5 years, not 4, to graduate, when our students graduate, they've had incredible experiences. And if they're interested in politics, they probably have done a co-op either at the White House or in the Congress, one at the State House, maybe one for a nonprofit, maybe one in a campaign. And they come out of this experience not only with wonderful work experiences, but in many cases they walk right into jobs with their co-op employers who've had a chance to see them in action. And many, many of my students today are now deeply and actively involved in government, in public service. Now, we do leave you for 3 months in the wintertime and drag ourselves out to Southern California, where I teach at the University of California at Los Angeles, UCLA. It's a terrible burden, but somebody's got to do it. So we leave you for 3 months. one of our excuses is that 2 of our 3 kids live in the West. We have a daughter in Denver, a daughter in San Francisco. Our son lives in Newton. And so it gives us an opportunity to spend time with our daughters and their families. They each have 2 kids, and so we have a good time out there. But being part of that California political culture is kind of interesting because that's a rapidly changing place and things are happening out there. So we're slightly bi-coastal, but home is Boston, home is Massachusetts, and most of the year I spend teaching at Northeastern. Never goes home. We don't have any summer break. I mean, I teach right through the spring, summer, and fall. And it's been a wonderful experience. There's only one problem. Northeastern has become unbelievably popular. We had 50,000 kids apply for admission to the freshman class at Northeastern for 3,000 spots. The highest of any non-public university in the United States of America. Can you believe that? How come? Well, part of it's Boston, which is a big draw, but most of it is co-op. Most of it is this combination of study and work that our students have an opportunity to do in whatever field. If they're engineering majors, they have co-op jobs with engineering firms and walk right into jobs with these engineering companies. If they're interested in communications, they work in communications. I mean, it's a wonderful program. Why more schools aren't doing it, I don't know. The only branch of the University of Massachusetts which is serious about co-op is the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. And not surprisingly, the chancellor of the University of Massachusetts Lowell, who, by the way, is a terrific chancellor, happens to be a former congressman named Marty Meehan, who is very committed to co-op. Why? Well, because I think in his career in public life as an assistant district attorney, an assistant attorney general, and subsequently congressman, he sees the value of this kind of experience combined with schoolwork. So he's recruited a former provost from the university from Northeastern to come up there, and then now, in fact, I just saw him the other day. I said, "How's co-op going?" He said, "It's going great. We're working at it." So at least that's one school here in Massachusetts, in addition to Northeastern's, that's doing it. But I tell you, it's great fun to be at Northeastern, great fun to teach. And these days, I'm trying my own way to try to help train the next generation of public leaders, folks like you. So I hope all of you will use this experience here at Camp USA to think seriously about being involved in public life, being involved in student government, Katie, as you are. Many of us were and started it. And don't let anybody tell you that this is not a great life. It is. It is. Now you've got to set high standards of integrity for yourself and the people that work for you. If you want to make a lot of money, don't go into public life, because you're not going to make a lot of money, but you can have enormous personal satisfaction from doing the kinds of things you're doing at whatever level. And fortunately, Kitty and I have had that opportunity, and it's been great, and we're still at it all the time, and it's great fun, notwithstanding what happened to me on that plane to Greece. Anyway, I think I'll stop at that point, Carolyn. Is that okay?
I think the governor deserves.
And I don't know whether you have any questions or any of you want to, whatever. Katie, start us off with a question. Any question? Or anyone else for that matter. Any questions at all? Any of you guys?
Well, I guess just because it's such an insight to hear that you were in a presidential campaign, and that's something that it's so wonderful to have. So we were wondering, what was like the most memorable thing about running for president? Like what spoke to you the most, or just had?
Well, the best thing was winning the nomination. The worst thing was losing the election. But I made some mistakes in that campaign, unfortunately. And one of them was that I spent too much time talking to people who I thought knew more than I did about how to run for the presidency. By that time, I knew something about running for governor. And most of these people in those days would poo-poo this precinct-based grassroots organizing. You know, they'd say, well, if you're running for town meeting or city council or town council or one of those things. But, you know, for the presidency, it's all about media and money and stuff. It took Barack Obama to prove that precinct-based grassroots organizing wins the presidency, too. because without it, Obama never would have won in 2008, and he never would have won 2012. And that was a mistake, a serious mistake I made. Another mistake I made was that this was Bush 1, the first Bush, came at me with some pretty tough attack stuff, and I made a decision, which turned out to be the dumbest thing I ever did, that I would not respond to any of the Bush attacks. It was a mistake. I mean, you've got to be ready for this. Look, you know, politics is a competitive enterprise. I mean, you're arguing about some important issues. And by the time I woke up to the fact that a lot of damage was being done, it was almost impossible to repair it. Too bad, because that was a winnable election, but not, as it turned out, the way I ran it. These days, I think most people now understand that the kind of grassroots organizing that got me elected as governor and that got Obama elected as president is an important part of politics. And by the way, a great part of politics, because it means that those of us running have to reach out to you guys, lots and lots of young people, and get you involved. Because most of us, you know, get started by getting involved in somebody else's campaign. That's how we first get into active politics. We see somebody who we like and respect and who shares our values and philosophy, and we've got to work for that person. And that's the way we kind of get started. Student government, as I pointed out, is also an important part of this. Also, I was always in the school council and that kind of thing. So, so that's an important part of this process. But too bad I had to learn those lessons during the campaign, not before the campaign. Certainly, accepting the nomination in Atlanta with my mother. My dad had passed away by that time. My mother was 85, campaigned all over the country for me. This little Greek girl who came over to the United States at the age of 9 and was the first Greek-American young woman, kids, ever to go away to college in the history of the United States. 1921. It was almost unheard of. This Greek immigrant girl went to Bates College in Lewiston, Maine. Graduated, became a school teacher, met my dad. And the rest, they say, is history. And years later, our oldest grandchild, who's now 24 and is working for ABC News in Washington, went to Bates College and called us very excited a week after she got there. She said, I've been in the library studying, and I looked up, you won't believe this, there's a picture of Yaya on the wall. And that was my mother and her great-grandmother. So, so having my mother there, Katie, as I accepted that nomination was very special. Unfortunately, I peaked in Atlanta instead of peaking on election day. But there we are. But it's an extraordinary experience. Needless to say, the toughest thing you'll ever have to do, but one of the great things that you want to do. And unfortunately, I didn't make it. As I say, these days I owe you all an apology. If I'd beaten Bush 1, you'd never heard of Bush 2. We wouldn't be in this mess. So, so it's my fault. Blame me. Anyway, any other questions? Any other? What do you think?
I think there's a question over here. Ashley?
Ashley, where are you? Yes.
I actually have a question from Mrs. Dukakis.
Great.
Okay.
Come on up. Come on up here, sweetie.
Let's give Mrs. Dukakis a round of
Back into that.
Thank you. Yes.
I was just wondering how you've been involved in politics and how you've involved yourself
Okay.
in your husband's campaigning and...
Yeah, I often don't talk about this, but I was the president of the Girls League at Brookline High School when I was a senior. And I also went away to Pennsylvania State University because I had learned how to dance at camp. And I went to the same camp for 9 years. And my camp teacher had a dance school in State College, Pennsylvania, and asked me to teach for her. And that's how I started teaching dance. And so that was special. But my 9 years at camp in Harrison, Maine were extraordinary for me. And we were supposed to go to our...
She was elected to the student senate at Penn State, so
Yeah.
she was on our first date. We went out to dinner, and I took Kitty to a movie, which was a prize-winning Italian movie named Rocco and His Brothers. And for reasons I don't understand, neither one of us seemed to like it. And I'm so frugal that, I mean, if I pay for a movie, I stay. I'd never walk out of it. But I turned to Katie and I said, "Are you enjoying this?" And she said, "Not particularly." I said, let's get out of here. We went back to her apartment. She made me a cup of tea and we talked politics for an hour and a half. And the rest, as they say, is history. 52 years later.
But when did I do that campaign in front of St. Mary's?
Well, this is an interesting story. Katie had been previously married. Fortunately for me, it was a lousy marriage. So she came back from the West Coast with a little 3-year-old who, for all practical purposes, has been my son ever since, and is now 55. Can you believe that? We have a 55-year-old son. And but she went back to school at Lesley College in Cambridge and wanted to finish her degree. And she was going to graduate with that degree in June of 1963. My first campaign for the legislature was in the fall of '62. So I figured, just to make sure, I mean, we were very much in love and we were going to be married, but just to make sure she understood what she was getting into, I asked her to work in front of the polling place at St. Mary's Church in Brookline Village for 13 hours. And when they came out of there with a decisive majority, I figured she was the girl for me. I mean, and that was not an easy polling place. That was not an easy polling place. So just an early test of what she was getting into. But we also, from the day we were married, had 2 basic rules, folks, which I think were very important. Dinner at home at 6 o'clock at night, without exception, and no politics on Sunday, with 3 exceptions: St. Patrick's Day Parade, Greek Independence Day, and Combined Jewish Philanthropy Super Sunday. Kitty's yours. And on those days, I took Saturday off. I'm serious. I was home for dinner at 6 o'clock at night with my family every single night.
And then went out afterwards.
It's no big, look, it was as important for me as it was for my family, I can tell you. To have that break, to spend time with Kitty and our kids, very important for me. And Sundays were very special days for us. I mean, I just would not do anything political on Sunday. I figured if I couldn't run the state 6 days a week, then I was absolutely incompetent. And obviously, there must be something to it, because we've been married for 50 years. And that's an important thing to think about. Not that public life isn't important, being governor isn't important, running for the presidency, Katie, is not obviously a huge thing to do. And obviously, I had to waive the dinner at home at night when I ran for the presidency. But that was important, too. All of our kids by that time were in college or beyond. If just one of our 3 kids had still been in high school, I would have not run for the presidency. Nothing against the Obamas, the Clintons, the Gores, all these folks that have young kids. My hat's off to them. But I just would not have run nationally if just one of our children still was in high school. I wouldn't do it. I mean, it's just, family's just too important to us.
About what happened with Claudia. I think
No, I don't want to talk. No.
Okay.
No. Anyway, so it's been great to have a wife and a partner who not only accepted this, but herself was and continues to be deeply and actively involved in political life. It would be very tough, Katie, to have this kind of life if you had a life's partner that was unsympathetic, didn't understand it, wasn't committed to it. I mean, I think it would be hell, to tell you the truth. Because while we've had a great life and we worked very hard with those rules to make sure we set aside time for ourselves and our kids, if you don't have that kind of partnership, then it's going to be very tough.
Are there any more questions?
Any other questions, guys? Yes, Adeline. Are children and grandchildren involved in politics? The answer is yes.
Our daughters, 2 daughters and son. are
All
very much
involved, yeah. And we have, our oldest grandchild is now 24. That's Allie, the grandchild that graduated from Bates. And she's now with ABC News in Washington. And probably headed for a career in journalism, but already writing for the ABC website and very much involved. And as a matter of fact, when we went to the Democratic Convention in Charlotte, North Carolina in September, we sought out the two ABC correspondents. And one of them was a guy named Jonathan Karl, who covers the White House for ABC News. And we said, how's our daughter? How's our granddaughter? And he told us, you know, what every set of grandparents loves to hear. She's terrific. In fact, he said, here's a text message from her. She's just texting me on some piece of news that just came into Washington that she wants me to. So, yeah, our kids our grandkids, I think, are going to be actively involved.
We have only 2 grandsons. We have 6 granddaughters. And one of the grandsons just won, for the 2nd year in a row, the tennis open in Denver.
14 and under. He's the 14 and under champion. He's a great kid. But we're also bringing him along on the political side of things, we hope. His father's a Republican, so it's a little bit of a issue here. But he's kind of a thoughtful, moderate Republican. So we.
And his 2 closest friends are the Democratic governor and the Democratic senator from Colorado. So
yeah.
He's had
In fact, one of our favorite pictures of Nico, who's our 14-year-old, was when John Hickenlooper announced for governor, and the picture on the front page of the Denver Post was of then Mayor, now Governor Hickenlooper, kind of kneeling down and greeting our grandson warmly. It's a great picture. But they're going to have to, they'll have to make their own choice and decide, is this what they want to do? Or they want to do something else? Yeah, Chris.
Why did you choose Lloyd in 1988?
Why did I choose Benson?
Yes.
Well, you go through an interesting process. As you know, we've had some picks for vice president that have not been good ones. And I was determined. One of the things I did right was to do the selection process, and went through a pretty serious selection process. Narrowed the field down to 4 very good people, including Al Gore, by the way, who was one of my 4 kind of finalists.
I think you should have gone with Al Gore. That might have been a very strong...
Possibly. On the other hand, Benson was a great running mate.
Yeah.
Benson...
We all just ran him over in 88.
No, on the contrary. He killed Quayle. The famous debate, he absolutely destroyed Quayle. Remember the famous exchange where he said, you know Jack Kennedy?
Yeah, that's what
No, Benson was a terrific running mate. It was my fault that we lost. In fact, if it had been closer, Benson might have made the difference. So, I was any of those folks would have been fine. Gore would have been fine and so forth. Benson was just a very good running mate for me.
And will you be involved in the governor race in 2014?
Well, I suspect so. I may not endorse anybody in the primary. Not that these endorsements mean an awful lot, but I feel very strongly about the state and the direction in which it's headed, and I want to make sure we keep moving in the right direction. So I'll do everything I possibly can.
Really cool. It doesn't really matter who you go for. I just want to see someone like you in the governor.
You're nice to say that.
To be just doing something, because we need people like you back into the political sphere, because there's so many radicals, and we need someone that actually can see the other side.
Well, you hope you can do that. There's a division now that's really very troubling, and I'm not saying this as a partisan Democrat, but I worked with some terrific Republicans when I was in state government. Unfortunately, most of those folks are no longer in the Republican Party, and I'm a little concerned about. You've got to be looking for common ground all the time, folks. And take for example the health care issue. We're debating this health care issue. Any of you know who the uninsured people are in the United States these days? We have 50 million Americans without a dime of health insurance, and another 50 million with lousy health insurance. Who are these people? Any of you know who they are? Chris, any idea? 85% of them are working Americans or members of their family. They're not loafing, they're not sitting around, they're not on welfare. These are working Americans, no health insurance. And when they get so sick that they can't stand up, they end up in the emergency room at 10 times the cost if they go into a doctor in the first place. This is all about working Americans and their families, and I'm not sure that those of us who support the Affordable Care Act are helping people to understand that. These are working folks, no health insurance. Now, if you go out and take a poll tomorrow, folks, and ask the American people, should working Americans and their families have decent, affordable health care, what do you think the numbers would look like? 93% say yes. So why aren't the proponents of the Affordable Care Act saying this? You know, this other stuff is interesting. These are working folks. And in my opinion, it's a national disgrace, Chris, that working Americans and their families don't have the same guarantees. In Greece, outside of Delphi, when I was taken by that restaurant owner to the community hospital there and examined by an eye doctor who said, this is very serious, you have an ulcerated cornea, you must go to Athens immediately. And I said, how much do I owe you? He said, oh, no, this is part of the national health system. You don't have to pay anything. Nobody put me through the third degree, checked all my insurances and all that kind of stuff. So, but I'm not sure that my party has done a particularly effective job of helping people to understand this. That's why there's so much controversy. So one of the things that I learned, took me a long time as governor, is that the first thing you do is sit people down and say, okay, can we agree on what the problem is? If you get people to agree on what the problem is, you're halfway to a solution. And we haven't had that kind of discussion enough, in my opinion, Chris, on a lot of issues.
Christian, right here.
Yes, Billy.
What was the main issue in 1988? What was the center, the big topic?
In 1988,
Big debate,
all about the economy, which is usually the issue. There was a kind of superficial prosperity, but it was obvious that it was about to collapse. And in point of fact, unfortunately for George H.W. Bush, it did collapse during his administration. It wasn't his fault, in my opinion. It had a lot to do with what happened before he got there. I mean, he was vice president, but he was not president. And it's the reason Clinton got elected in 92, because the economy fell apart under Bush. Because, why? Well, we were putting things on a credit card, and we weren't paying our bills, and we were doing a lot of stuff that, in my opinion, we should have done. Now, my big strength was that Massachusetts, which had been a basket case economically in the mid-'70s, by the mid-'80s was, the great Massachusetts miracle. I mean, we turned things around, and the state was doing exceedingly well. So my pitch obviously was, look, if we're able to do it in my state, we can do it nationally. But didn't quite work as effectively as I'd hoped. But usually, I mean, as it is today, I mean, what's the single most important issue for most people? It's the state of the economy, and whether or not we're creating good jobs for people. Patrick.
What do you do in your spare time?
Say again? What do I do in my spare time? What do I do in my spare time? What's my spare time like?
There isn't a lot of spare time.
Well, I work very hard at my teaching, Patrick, and I spend a lot of time with my students because I'm not going to write great books. What I bring to the classroom, or if I bring anything, is the kind of experience I've had and an ability to inspire young people to think seriously about public service. So I spend a lot of time with my students, spend a lot of time both in and out of the classroom. And then I've got a lot of reading to do. If you're gonna teach folks, you've got to be very much up on your material, on what's going on and stuff. And then we continue to be I'm on 7 nonprofit boards. I mean, don't ask me what I'm doing on them, but I mean, they're all doing important things. And I want to be a part of that. And we're deeply involved in the political process, Chris. He's the guy that did it, but I'm the guy that sat down with Deval Patrick back when nobody knew who he was, and I said, look, if you're going to win this thing, you've got to organize every one of the 2,157 precincts in this state, no exceptions. You get out there and find a precinct captain in every one of those precincts. His or her job is to recruit 6 block captains, and their job is to make personal contact on an ongoing basis, not over the phone, on their front steps with every single voting household. Now, I'd made that speech to a lot of people. A lot of them ignored it. He listened. He listened, went out, and organized 2,157 precincts. Guy who never held elective office got elected president.
How many precincts are there?
2,157 precincts.
I just want to say, if I see you and Bill Weld out there both campaigning for your candidate, that will make Massachusetts probably one of the leaders in politics, and you'll probably see a shift back to the way it was, that way that we can work together and such. Here's
a story for you. Weld was a young associate in my law firm, and I was responsible for the young associates. So when he became governor, I used to say to him, where did I go wrong? I mean, why are you doing this? You ought to be doing. I like him personally. I don't share his philosophy, but I like him personally, and he's a very bright and a very funny guy. But And by the way, Bill Weld, Mike Dukakis, and Deval Patrick all came out of the same law firm. And we all became governor. Isn't that something?
My last question.
One last question. Nicole.
Were your parents very involved in politics?
Mine were more than yours.
Kitty's dad was interested in politics. Now, Kitty's dad was a violinist with the Boston Symphony and the associate conductor of the Boston Pops. The older folks here know who Harry Ellis Dixon was. He was a wonderful guy. He was Kitty's dad. But interested in politics. Went out and campaigned for me, for the presidency. I wouldn't say my folks were involved, but they were interested. They voted. They took their responsibilities as citizens seriously. And this was in the pre-television days, at 6 o'clock at night, I don't know if even some of the older folks here remember this, the CBS World News Roundup was on radio, 6 o'clock. And they had correspondents broadcasting from all over the world. This was very new at the time, folks. You know, here was this guy in Rome, here was this guy in Tokyo, here was this guy someplace else. And the CBS World News Roundup was on in the Dukakis household every night at 6 o'clock. we were expected to listen to that. So while my parents weren't political activists, they certainly surrounded us with a sense of civic responsibility. And Kitty has one more thing she wants to add.
A very funny thing happened a couple of weeks ago. Our middle child, Andrea, is a reporter in Denver, Colorado. And she has worked for NPR for 15 years. And she was doing a special and called us up and said, I'll be on the radio between 1 and 2. We could not find a working radio in our house and had to go into this. It was 100 degrees outside, had to go into our car because we had a radio in the car and listen to Andrea.
Garage and turn on the radio, listen to
her.
She's been a reporter and producer. The government. She's the government reporter for Colorado Public Radio and has been for about 15 years. But in any event, so my parents clearly, created an environment where you expected to know what was going on in the world, and that unquestionably had a lot to do with my interest in this stuff. Anyway, I think it's time to wrap things up, but thank you very much for having, and by the way, let me say this to you. If any of you, as time goes on, have an interest thinking about public life, I'm at Northeastern most of the year, and m.dukakis@neu.edu will reach me even when I'm in sunny California. So please don't hesitate to check in, come by, come on the Northeastern campus. I'll give you the grand tour. It's a great place.
Governor,
And
you are an inspiration to all of us. Let's give him.
thanks. Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
And on behalf of Camp USA, I would like to designate today, Monday, August 19th, 2013, as Governor Michael Dukakis Day. So this is for you.
When Carolyn gets elected governor, she'll be doing this every Tuesday morning.
Too sweet, too
Every
sweet.
Tuesday morning. That's when I do proclamations and days and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, thank you all so much.
Sure, sure.